Greetings, viewers. You are listening to episode 5 of the Ja Lord podcast show. It is Saturday, April 8th, 2017, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. A few days ago, Syria's dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a deadly chemical attack on his own people, killing 100 innocent lives, including children and babies. And now Donald Trump is pretending to care about the Syrian people. He's like, oh, those beautiful babies. Meanwhile, it wasn't too long ago that Donald Trump was wanting to cozy up to Assad. I've also seen the pictures of the fatalities from the chemical attack, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so horrible. So many innocent people dead. I even saw like children with like foam in their mouths, and I'm like, oh my god. This is just very sad and depressing, but it gets worse, and by worse, I mean much worse. A couple days after the chemical attack, Donald Trump launched 50 Tomahawk missiles at the base where the attack originated. And guess what? That base is still launching attacks right now, so that means Donald Trump missed it, intentionally. For the past couple weeks, Noam Chomsky's been warning that Donald Trump might exploit a tragedy to distract from his whole business with Russia, and it's happened. And here's the really fucked up part. Donald Trump owns stock in the company that makes the Tomahawk missiles, and that company's stock price has been skyrocketing lately. So now it's looking like we're going to have another war for profit, and it's going to make groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. a lot stronger. What do you think's going to happen once the kids who are orphaned by the war in Syria all grow up? They're going to be out for revenge. That's what's going to happen. Some of these kids, once they grow up, they're going to be wearing black robes, hoods, touting AKs, wearing suicide vests, chanting death to America, and the US will be wondering why all these terrorist attacks happen. And it all goes back to these wars for profit. How would you feel if you were a little child playing with toys and a foreign power came in, stormed into your house, killed your parents, your grandparents, your pets, and you were the only survivor? How would you feel? Make you cry? Would it make you angry? Would it make you want vengeance? Well, that's how people in Syria and Iraq feel every day. And this brings me to another topic I'd like to cover during this podcast. So this past week there were 2 terrorist attacks in Europe. One in St. Petersburg in Russia and another in Stockholm in Sweden. In St. Petersburg last week, a suicide bomber blew himself up in the subway, killing like 14 people, and apparently the St. Petersburg attack didn't get much news coverage in the US because it happened in Russia. And apparently Russian lives matter less to the media than Western lives. Plus, the media's been rather silent about the Trump-Russia scandal, and Vladimir Putin was using the St. Petersburg attack as an excuse to crack down on the mass protests that were going on against his presidency. Yesterday there was a truck ramming in Sweden that killed like 4 people and injured 15 others. But this one, because it happened in Western Europe, it got like round-the-clock, wall-to-wall news coverage. Apparently in this incident, a beer truck was hijacked and then rammed into a department store on Stockholm's busiest street. So far, no group has claimed responsibility, but that's subject to change, and the driver of the truck was apparently a 39-year-old from Uzbekistan. Sweden also has one of the highest refugee populations in the world. This attack makes Sweden look bad, and people are asking whether or not Donald Trump is right about Sweden's refugees being rapists, criminals, terrorists, and whatnot. Somebody I follow on Twitter said an attack on Sweden is an attack on all the refugees that Sweden's agreed to accept. And for a while now, because of incidents like this, people have been saying that Europe's not safe anymore, but I learned that back in the 1970s and 80s, terrorism deaths in Europe were much, much higher than they are today. Back then it was the communist groups and the IRA doing the terrorism. Now it's like ISIS and related groups. See, the media wants to take every crime committed by a Muslim in Europe and blow it way out of proportion so they can get ratings. Also, the Boycott Israel movement is very popular in Europe, and the media's been trying to make those guys look bad and make it look like we need Israel's help to stop these terrorists. The only thing the mainstream media really cares about is two things: ratings and money. Plus, Facebook has been hyping up every single crime committed by a Muslim to the #1 spot in their trending topics section. These mainstream news sites and these US media pundits make money off us being scared, basically. They give the impression that the US and Canada are the only safe countries in the world. There's a lot more to the world than America, ISIS, Russia, Mexico, and Donald Trump. I've been to the Bahamas and Mexico, and they were so much fun, and I definitely felt better than I did in America. I'm hoping to visit Amsterdam, Paris, Milan, Florence, and Rome at some point this fall or early next year. For now, the French elections are coming up pretty soon, and I hope to God Marine Le Pen loses. For those of you who don't know who Marine Le Pen is, she's this right-wing populist candidate who thinks that Islam is not compatible with European values, that Jews should have to give up their Israeli citizenship. She wants to leave the European Union, and she also wants to cozy up to Vladimir Putin. Current polls show the centrist candidate Emmanuel Macron neck and neck with Marine Le Pen for the first round of voting. He didn't know France does things differently than in the US. They have 2 rounds of voting, one with multiple candidates and another with the final 2. Current polls for round 2 show Emmanuel Macron beating Le Pen by 20-something percentage points. However, I'm not too crazy about polls because polls also said Hillary would win, but Donald Trump won. However, what I'm more worried about is Russia interfering with France's election like they did in the US. I do not want the French to share our fate. There's also a lot of fake news going around France about the election. For example, there was this story that Emmanuel Macron's campaign was being financed by Saudi Arabia, which was fake. I just hope to God that the French aren't as gullible as Americans are, because some people have theorized that fake news has determined the outcome of the 2016 presidential election in the US. Last thing I want to talk about before I close out this podcast is Ghost in the Shell. The original, not the remake. Apparently, I've been hearing bad things about the Ghost in the Shell remake from my friends and whatnot, which is exactly why I decided to stay home and watch the original in my bathrobe and pajamas with some wine and pizza. I'm probably going to do a review video on the original Ghost in the Shell movie pretty soon, so I'm not going to describe the movie right now. However, I am very glad I did not spend the money on seeing the remake in the theater. That would have been a waste of time and money. I already talked about the Hollywood nostalgia fad in one of my previous podcasts, so I'm not going to talk about it again. That being said, I rarely go to the movies anymore, except when there are some really good horror movies out. That concludes this episode of the Jah Lord Podcast Show. Once again, it is Saturday, April 8th, 2017. Peace.